Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Okay. And here we are. Just let me see if I can take care of that. There we go. So we have been discussing having quite a few interpretations of this phrase לפתח חטאת רובץ. At the opening, sin crouches. And just to show you how much we've had to do about this, here it is. So we had this right here, okay? And here is a reference to it right there, okay? So there's quite a little bit that we have to discuss about it, different ways of understanding it. So we did this particular one yesterday, and here we are today. So לפתח חטאת רובץ, sin crouches at the opening. Amar Rabbi, said Rabbi. When it just says Rabbi, rabbi, it means Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah, the head of the community. Rabbi is given credit with the decision to compile the Mishnah, the major book on oral law, in the year 200. That's around when he lived. And because the Romans were threatening and forbidding the Jews from studying Torah, Rabbi was very concerned that it would all be forgotten. And so up to that point, it was basically committed to memory. But at this point, he decided to take a revolutionary step, circumstances altered cases, and to try and put it down in writing. The way in which it got written down was still in somewhat of an abbreviated sense. And that's why we need the Gemara, the Talmud, to analyze and clarify what's written in the Mishnah. But regardless, it was had a huge impact on the development of Jewish law, of halacha. So Rabbi, he's simply known as Rabbi because of his preeminence. Davar ze limdani Antoninos. So Rabbi was very close to one of the Roman leaders, Antoninus, and they had many conversations, of some of which are quoted in various rabbinic texts, and this is obviously one of those discussions. And here Rabbi is giving credit to Antoninus for what he is about to state. Yetzer haRa, the evil inclination, sholet, it governs, it rules, ba'adam, in an individual, misha'at yitziat la'olam, from the moment he emerges into the world. Shene'emar, as it states, לפתח חטאת רובץ, that is to say that sin crouches at the door, at the opening. So opening, of course, understood meaning here coming into the world, the opening of the womb. So we'll take.
What is the word hatat?
So we're understanding it as sin, sin. Chatat is also a word that's used for sin offering, but it is definitely a word that refers to sinning.
Is that different than the word chet, or are they
No,
related?
it's related to it. It is certainly related to it. And the thing about hate we should understand is because there are three levels of sinning. The lowest level is essentially a hate, where it's missing the mark. The word is used, this verb is also used in reference to an arrow that misses its mark. So hate here has to do more with sins that are unintentional and come presume of some kind of ignorance. But that possibility and that lack of caring, that's why, by the way, Talmud Torah is so important, that you don't commit sins out of ignorance. We know that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but it is the lowest level. Then there is avon, which is you know what you're doing is wrong, but you're still doing it, either because of a desire to do it, or some kind of thing like that, or an intent to gain in some way personally at someone else's expense. And the final level, the third level, is pesha, which is rebellion. And Pesha refers to doing this, committing the sin with the intention of rebelling against God, saying, let's see who's in charge here. I'm not going to do it. And I know that God doesn't want me to do it, but I'm going to do it mainly to show who's boss. So we mention all three, by the way, in the Yom Kippur service, right? We talk about Chatati, Aviti, Pashati. We say all three. So that's the issue going on here in terms of the word chait. Because any kind of even a misdemeanor is still something that's punishable. So, did I answer the question, Judith? If you're able to unmute, okay, just come in when you need to. So here's the Torah Temimah, right? Siman ledavar. That is to say that it's an indication of the matter. Ki לפתח יציאתו, that is to say, at the opening of his coming out, le'olam, into the world, Yetzer haRa sholet bo. The evil inclination has the dominion over him. Aval lo misha'at yetzirah, but not from the moment of his formation. In other words, inside the womb, this does not apply at all. All right? So there's some questions that are going to have to be answered as a result. Ukahai Gavna, in a similar kind of sense, Darshu Yerushalmi Brachot, in the tractate Brachot, in chapter 3, Halacha 5, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, they interpret al pasuk regarding the verse that says Ki Yetzer lev ha'adam ra min urav, which is usually translated as, you see here we got the Yetzer ra, right? The imaginings of a man's life, of the heart of man, the imaginings of the heart of man are evil from his youth. And they give min urav, they translate, which nar, we know means a youth, right? But here we're giving it a different meaning from a similar root, min arav ketiv. So they note that min urav is pronounced min urav, but there's no vav there in the Torah text. And it says min arav is the way it's written. Misha'a shahu nin ar v'yatsa lo'olam. That is to say, from the moment that he has stirred up and come out into the world, right? So that's another way of saying the same thing. That is to say that the Yetzer haRa, the inclination to do evil, it comes from the moment a person is born. V'tzarich iyun, and consequently, we're going to have to look carefully, mima shekatuv ba'agodot, something that's written in the Agadic material, in the legendary material, Rosh Perek Toldot, at the Rosh Parshat Toldot, at the beginning of the Parsha of Toldot. That's the Parsha in Genesis that essentially talks about the story of Isaac and Rebekah and Esau and Jacob. V'yitrotzetzu, this is the verse that goes, V'yitrotzetzu habanim b'kirba. And the children struggled within her. And of course, we said this is about Rebekah's pregnancy, that she had a difficult pregnancy. And of course, she had twins in her womb and that they were struggling. And of course, literally, this is an allusion to the struggle that they would have. Here they were twins, but they would be in conflict and struggle throughout their lives. And so the fact that it says they were struggling within her womb, in other words, before they'd emerged into the world, and the interpretation is Keshe'avra Rivka Lifnei Beit HaMidrash, that when Rivka would pass by a study hall, a house of study, Nidchak Yaakov Latzeit, Jacob would push to come out, to emerge. Ukeshe'avra Lifnei Beit Avodat Elilim, but when Rebecca would go by a place of idol worship, Nidchak Esav Latzeit, Esau would push to come out, to emerge. haRa, and if that's the case, the haYetzer sholet ba'adam odo bebeten, that would seem to indicate that this inclination still has dominion of some kind while still in the womb. Uktzat yesh liyashev. And he says, well, there is a sort of way to answer that question. He says he doesn't feel it's a compelling argument or a compelling explanation, but it's somewhat satisfactory. Zedeh gufa kalul b'divrei Rivka. That in a sense, this issue is included in Rivka's own words. In other words, she herself is expressing surprise, as we'll see. Im Kain, this is what Rivka says when after the verse that talks about the struggling in her womb. Im Kain, if this is the case, lama ze anochi, why am I? Right? In other words, it was giving her such pain. Klomar, that is to say, when she said, lama ze anochi, why am I? Ma nishtanu alai, why have regarding myself, sidrei habriya, the normal course of creation, why have they changed? Shesholet bahem, that in fact that the Yetzer haRa is having dominion over them, kodem zmanam, before they emerged. And so that her words might be interpreted as her expressing anguish and surprise that she should be an exception to the rule. And of course, we know that the exception proves the rule. So that's one thought. I will tell you that there are other ideas too, whether Na'arav refers to turning and getting into the age of 13 and later on, right? That is the time when the Yetzer haRa starts to operate. Although I've also seen interpretations that say that is also when the Yetzer HaTov starts to operate, and that prior to that, perhaps people are not as conscious as they are later on, and they're not able to reason as well prior to that age. So it's just interesting, and on a broader level, I've been thinking very much about the story of Cain and Abel. I've been thinking about the fact that here we are with such advances in technology, and yet we're still waging war. That there's still a need to have these kinds of temporary advantages in the face of mortality, and that we can't just learn how to be kind to one another and share our resources, and yet we have to act in this particular way. And in some senses, it's craziness, and also a reflection of this Yetzer haRa, right? And the Yetzer haRa basically has to do with lust, envy, and ambition. And there's a statement in Pirkei Avot that says that those three things, giving into lust, giving into envy, giving into ambition, takes a person out of the world. So our last little drush on this statement, right? לפתח חטאת רובץ, at the opening, sin crouches. Darash Rabbi Simlai interpreted. B'sha'ah shehavlad b'ma'ei imo, at the time when the fetus is in the womb of its mother. Melamdim oto, this is actually a famous passage from the tractate Nida, right? Melamdim oto, they teach him kol haTorah, the entire Torah. V'kevan sheba la'avir ha'olam, and at the moment he comes into literally the air of the world, right? Ba malach, an angel comes, ustaro al piv, he smacks him on his mouth, umishkacho kol haTorah, and he makes him forget all the Torah he's learned, kula, every bit of it. Shene'emar, as it states, לפתח חטאת רובץ, and he's using this verse at the opening, חטאת, sin crouches, as an indication of this happening. So this is really a very interesting theory of knowledge, right? Because essentially what it's saying is that our process of learning is recollection, that's essentially the process of knowledge, certainly knowledge of the Torah, whether it means only the Torah, whether it means knowledge in general. Torah can be understood in a very broad sense. Again, this sort of requires further examination to see exactly what they mean, but also on a broader level, what's it trying to say? And also puzzling the process of gaining knowledge, which is a philosophical issue. Let's take a look at, there's a brief little short Torah Temimah here. Mefaresh Chatat. So here we go. He understands this word Chatat, milashon, from an expression where it means chisaron v'geraon, which means a lack and a diminution. In other words, Chatat Rovets, that is understanding then that the diminution takes place as he comes into the world. V'halashon לפתח, and of course the expression at the opening, siman hu, it's simile or metaphor, who, let's say, tol avir haolam, indicating coming out into the world, being born. Uchidrasha hakodemet, just the way we understood it in the previous drush. So interesting what exactly this implies as far as with human responsibility, in terms of what the whole idea of knowledge as an entity, and also responsibilities as human beings, and in terms of what life is really all about. So it certainly is a passage that lends itself to meditation. We'll try a little bit more. So here we go. Let's go back into the statement. So we know there's this whole deal here where Cain invites Abel and basically kills him, right? And God approaches Cain and says, Hevel achicha, where is Abel your brother? And Cain says, Lo yadati, I don't know, right? He lies in a sense, right? Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? Famous statements, right? And of course, it's understood as implying that in fact we are our brother's keeper. So in a sense, of course, he's lying because he just killed Abel and he should know what he did with the body. On the other hand, in another sense, he doesn't know where Abel is because Abel is now no longer living. He's in a different place. So going on to the verse that we're going to comment on, Vayomer, God says to him, Me asita, what did you do? Kol deme achicha, the voice of the bloods of your brother. So akim elai, they scream out to me, min ha'adamah, from the earth. And what a beautiful and poetic way to talk about the pain of murder and the tragedy of murder and the grief of murder. And also that God is conscious of every single act on the part of human beings. And the way in which, and we could also understand that in a sense that if religion is on one level a meditation about how we relate to the universe, each one of us, what is our relation to the universe, then clearly any murder has an effect. And we're saying that every murder has, on some level, a universal effect. So, Kol Demei Achicha, the voice of the bloods of your brother. Dam Achicha lo nemar. So they point out, it doesn't say the voice of the blood of your brothers. It says, he's saying, it doesn't say blood, ella Demei Achicha, but it says the bloods of your brother. Meaning, what is the plural? Damo, his blood, v'dam zarotav, and the blood of all his seed, right? Of all his descendants. Mikan, And from this we learn, shelo kedinei mamonot dinei nefashot. So in terms of adjudication, there are two basic types of situations. Dinei mamonot have to do with monetary cases, cases that involve money. Dinei nefashot have to do with capital cases. Now, I believe that money cases also would include compensation for injury, but capital cases stand by themselves in that they all have to do with murder of some kind or, manslaughter, something like that. And he says there's a distinction. Because of the implication of murder and bringing to end the life of an individual, because of all their subsequent descendants are affected by that. Dinei mamonot, with regards to, let's call them monetary cases, Adam noten mamon, a person can compensate, that he can give money, umit kaperlo, and find atonement. In other words, it's possible in a case where you defraud someone to compensate them for the fraud that you committed, right? Aval dinei nefashot, but with regard to cases that involve death, damo v'dam zarotav tluyumbo. The fact is that not only his blood, his life, but the life of all his descendants are dependent on him. Ad sof haolam, until the end of the world. Forever, in other words. That's from Tractate Sanhedrin, and we'll take a look here. Ritzono lomar. So what is he trying to say? V'chulan enon chazara. They cannot be compensated. They cannot ever come back. Once this person has been killed, all those subsequent descendants, they will never be born. They cannot come back. V'lo kidinei mamonot, and so not through the way in which monetary cases shemit kaper b'mamon, in which a person can be atoned for through compensation. Nafka mina bazeh, and the practical distinction, by making a distinction between these two cases, that kashemakablin edut, that when one receives testimony b'dinei nafashot regarding capital cases, sarich la'ayem aleihem, one has to speak to the witnesses and basically scare them, shelo yagidu sheker, against the possibility of committing false testimony, because the stakes are so high at that point that you have to la'ayem alehem. You need to, in a way, threaten the witnesses, not necessarily threaten them in the normal sense of threaten, but to make them feel very concerned, that too scared to tell you a lie. V'yad'u v'yed'u godel ha'achriyut, and they should know the degree of responsibility shemekablim alehem ve'edutam, that they have accepted upon themselves in giving testimony. Asher im edo yagidu sheker, inasmuch as if they provide false testimony, if they lie, yechayvui bedam naki, they are now going to be guilty of innocent blood. But al yedezeh, but through this, avon damav v'dam zarotav talui bahem, and so in that sense, right, the transgression of his blood and the blood of all his offspring, talui bahem, his descendants, are going to be dependent on them. They're going to have that responsibility. So, and with this, we will conclude this morning's lesson. All right. Any comments before we? Yes, Harlan, you'll need to unmute.
You said there was 3 levels of sin. What are the 3 levels?
The one is out of ignorance, that you just didn't know better. That's a chait. The second level is you know better, but you do it. Okay, that's more serious. And then there's rebellion, where you know all about it, you're denying God essentially. You're saying that you have more jurisdiction than God. You don't need to do what God wants you to do. That's rebellion, in other words, rebellion against God. Those are
And
the yeah.
that's very good. But what about premeditated murder? Is
Well,
that a capital offense?
it is a capital offense.
Okay, well, what
And
if
part of
about
it has to be premeditation.
yes, but what about an accident by murder that
That's
they
not
want to kill
that's
somebody?
that's manslaughter. Essentially, that's determined as manslaughter. There's even in a case of an accident, you have to determine the level of responsibility of the individual who did it. And you know, manslaughter through negligence. Negligence is still a serious problem. If you know that you're doing something that could possibly kill someone else and you're negligent about it, that places a high level of responsibility on you. Okay, it's not a capital case, but nevertheless, it is punishable. That's where they would have to go to a city of refuge. Someone guilty of that could go to a city of refuge, and they would have to stay there until the death of the high priest. And the death of the high priest essentially atones ultimately for that particular crime. And then they can go back home. So, yeah.
It
All
seems
right.
like
Yeah,
it
go
seems
ahead.
like it seems like jealousy is a problem with Cain. I don't know why he became so jealous.
Well, it's human nature, Harlan. It is human nature. And sadly, because, unless we sort of train ourselves to look honestly into ourselves and to be really honest about our faults, we tend to rationalize, what we do and in fact get angry. What happened was Abel gave the best and his offering was accepted. Cain didn't bother. And so when his offering wasn't accepted, instead of saying, well, the reason it wasn't accepted is because I really didn't bother that much, he simply gets jealous. But again, to what degree do we do what is called cheshbon hanefesh, right? We do a calculation, a working out of the soul, right? Okay. That's it for this morning. I'm going to stop the recording.